Hello and welcome to the Mike's DIY Tips channel on YouTube. I'm Mike, and in this video I'd like to show you how I made these storage reels for your garden electric cable for your mower or strimmer and garden hose. The cable or hose pulls straight off the reel, ready for use with no kinks, and quickly winds up. I mean, this cable on this size of reel, for one turn of the reel, it winds in about 1.5 metres of cable. For the hose, it winds in about 1.2 metres. The design is deliberately slim, projecting only a little way out from the wall so as not to cause an obstruction. Here are diagrams for the hose reel and cable reel respectively. The size and construction of each reel is the same with one exception, and that is the depth of the throat where the cable winds round, or in this case the depth of the throat where the hose winds round. This is deeper because the hose is much thicker than the cable. On each reel, the diameter of the front and back panel is 56 centimetres. If you look sideways at the reel, you get this configuration where the thickness of the front panel is shown up by that, and the back panel is that. In between, we've got 12 pieces of wood, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 12 all the way round, and the same there. Those are cut to exactly 8 centimetres long, because they make up the centre core onto which the hose or the cable is wound. I made my cross pieces of wood out of 20mm square section. You could use something thicker, but I wouldn't recommend using anything thinner. So the variation comes on the depth of throat. So for the hose reel it's 10 centimetres, but on the cable reel it's only 5 centimetres because the cable's thinner and you can wind a lot more on in a given space. Given those dimensions, the hose reel capacity is 24 metres or 80 feet, and that's assuming that the hose is approximately 18mm diameter. For the cable reel, its capacity is 40 metres or 130 feet. I'm now going to remove one of the reels from the wall to give you a close-up of its construction and show you what is behind. So first I take out the securing split pin and its backing washer. Now the whole reel comes off, and behind it you can see that we've got a square piece of 1-inch thick plywood screwed to the wall. Into that plywood is glued a length of this chrome tube. Also a piece of scrap rubber which I cut a hole in, and what that's for is simply to stop the back of the reel rubbing on the plywood block on the wall. So all these thicknesses and the thickness of the reel you have to take into account when eventually calculating the length of tube that you require and where to drill the little hole for the split pin. So now let's take the reel apart and show you what's inside. I've removed all 12 screws securing this panel onto the central core. If I take this away, we reveal the 12 pieces of wood. These are cut exactly to 8 centimetres long and obviously need to be cut dead square so that the whole thing goes together nicely. Then you need to find the centre of the end of each piece, this end and the other end, to drill pilot holes for the screws. The screw used is a 3.5 by 25mm countersunk wood screw. You can either laboriously crisscross the end of each piece of wood to find the centre, or, bearing in mind you've got to do 12 times 2 because you're doing both ends, easier to cut a piece of cardboard representing the exact end size of the wood, lay it on there like that and put a point through to mark the centre of the wood. Then you can drill a pilot hole. So for a 3.5mm diameter screw, I suggest using no more than a 3mm diameter pilot hole. You need to drill dead in line with the wood, not at an angle, because it would make it more difficult to insert the screw when you put it all together. We've got a centre hole there to suit the 1" or 25mm chrome tube which we're using as an axle. Now that you've got a good idea of what we're trying to achieve in the construction, we need to take you back now to how to mark out and cut the circle, and how to mark out for all of the hole positions for these pieces of wood. So here's a typical board. I've marked out a square 56 by 56, which is the diameter of the disc that we would want to cut. I've crisscrossed from corner to corner to find the centre. To draw the circle, we can use a piece of hardboard like this, where that would be the centre, and this is where we put the pencil in to draw all the way around. So with a small nail in the centre like that, this is free to rotate, so we can put our pencil in there and draw the circle. So the next thing is to cut that out, and the obvious tool to use is an electric jigsaw. But if you haven't got a jigsaw, you've got no alternative but to use a handsaw and keep cutting close to the line like that all the way around. So that will leave a lumpy edge which you then need to smooth off the best way you can, finishing up with coarse sandpaper and then fine sandpaper to get it looking reasonably respectable. Now we need to draw an inner circle representing the centre line of all the screw holes that are necessary to screw the pieces of wood in place. So let's start with the cable reel. As we've already said, the depth of the throat is 5 centimetres. So that would be 5 centimetres from the outer perimeter, but we've got to take into account half of the thickness of the piece of wood. We said that the piece of wood was 20mm, half of that is 10, so the centre line of the screws is going to be 5 plus 1 centimetre, so that's 6 centimetres in from the perimeter. So that is my hole there for the screws in the cable reel. And with similar logic, we need to come 10 centimetres there for the hose reel, plus another 10 for half the thickness of the wood. And we can now draw the circle. So that is the circle for the screws in the cable reel. If we were cutting out the 2 circular panels for the hose reel, instead we would draw a centre line for the screws there, all the way round. Now at this stage we haven't cut the hole in the centre. We mustn't cut it yet because we need to preserve that centre until we've marked out all the lines for the screws Because there are 12 pieces of wood and therefore 12 screw holes, the gap between the holes is 30 degrees on the circle. A full circle is 360, divided by 12 equals 30. So we need to mark out with a protractor those 30-degree increments. So we mark there, 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 and there, and so on all the way round, and that's where our holes need to be for the screws. You've just seen me marking out one of the circular panels for a reel. There's no need to mark out the second panel because you put the two panels together as a pair, as shown in this diagram, and then you can drill through so that you know all the holes line up, even if the marking out was slightly defective. To be sure that the two circular panels will go together again in the same way, put some sticky tape or pencil marks on the edge like that so that you know that they will come together correctly. When you drill the holes through, and by the way I would use a 3.5mm drill for a 3.5mm screw, because I know it's going to be a little tight inserting the screw, but it will ensure that it's not a sloppy fit. When you've done the holes, use a countersink bit to do a countersink recess in the face of both panels. When you've done that, you can use your bigger drill bit to drill the hole in the centre for your tubular axle, and it goes without saying that that needs to be an accurate match to the diameter of the tubular axle. When you've done all that work on the panels, they're ready for assembly. What we need to look at now is the mounting of the tubular axle into the wall block, and also the separation washer and the back washer for the split pin. Here's the wall block with the tubular axle already fixed into it, as you saw earlier. There's the packing piece which I showed you. I've used one to go behind the reel to stop the reel rubbing on the wooden block. It's just in case it would squeak and creak, but if you don't want to use that, or you haven't got any suitable material, you can mount the reel straight on there, and to prevent any squeaking as the reel rotates and rubs on the block, you can use some candle wax. A big consideration when making this is what length to cut the tube. It obviously has to go into the thickness of the wood, so it goes right to the back, plus if you've got any packing, and then the thickness of the reel itself, then the backing washer if you're going to use one, leaving you enough room to drill the hole for the split pin to go in. So the length of that tube and the position of that hole is very important and needs a lot of thought. The tube is fixed into the block with rapid hardening epoxy resin glue. This comes in two separate tubes for the glue and a hardener. You mix the right quantity together for the job just before you're going to use it, because it does set quickly. Apply it to the tube itself and to the inside of the hole on the wooden block. Push the tube right in so that it goes right through to the back. Then until the glue starts to set, which will take about 10 minutes, keep on checking that the tube is definitely still vertical, because it can just slowly move. So keep checking that until you find that you can't move the tube because the glue has started to set. Then put that on one side for several hours to let the glue set absolutely. You will get some glue that has oozed out around there, and you need to wipe it off, preferably before it sets. If you let it set first, you've got more of a difficulty. You need to use knives, chisels, files to get that right down to a neat finish like that. Now let's look at the backing washer, which goes onto the tube and sits just behind the split pin. It's to stop the rotating reel rubbing on the split pin and wearing it away. You might be lucky enough to get one of these in your local auto spares supplier, or if you go on the internet and look for the size of washer that you want, if that's a 25mm tube, search for an M for metric, M25 washer. And now the assembly of the reel is quite straightforward. As you can see, I've already fixed the wooden pieces to the back panel. One final check before you put the second panel on is to make sure that all these pieces of wood are nicely lined up with the face running round in a circle. You want the face pointing outwards. That's it. For the front panel, you need to remember to drill a hole and fit your knob before assembly. Then the other thing is, if you remember, I told you about registration marks to make sure all the holes line up. There's our two registration marks. So if we line those up there and get the first screw in, then pretty well all of the other holes will line up automatically. Just leave the screw loose at the moment until we get, there we are, another hole lined up. And so on all the way round. I've fitted all the screws, all of the holes lined up nicely, so now I've just got to screw them home. Finished. And now for the final assembly. We've made our block with the axle sticking out, it's screwed to the wall, and now we fit the reel. By the way, on my reel you may have noticed two flat edges like that, and that's simply because my piece of plywood wasn't quite wide enough to cut the full circle, but the whole thing still works, it's not a problem. So I fit my backing washer, and I've got to now coax the split pins through the hole. The top one's quite easy, it's the bottom hole that's tricky. Let's try it with the pliers. There we go, it's in. As you may know with a split pin, what you do is you divide it. So now that split pin can't come out because the two legs are pointing outwards. And that's free to use. To connect the hose to the reel, I just poke the end through the gap between two pieces of wood and start winding, guiding the hose pipe as it goes. So while I'm winding, the knob doesn't rotate, but it just slips in my fingers as I turn. When you finish winding, I just let the reel stop like that, and then it will find its own weight balance. But if you want to stop it turning, you can stuff a bit of foam behind the reel. For the cable reel, to start that off, I put a loop of string around one of the pieces of wood, put the plug in there like that and just wind. Just guiding the cable a little bit as it winds onto the reel. And then just finish winding and let the reel come to rest on its own. But again, if you want to stop it turning, you can stuff a piece of foam rubber in behind. Should point out that the amount of cable that I've got, that you can see here, is not the full amount that the reel will take. Here's another tip for your consideration. This cable on the reel goes all the way up my garden, so I only use this one cable to operate my mower, my strimmer and my electric lawn scarifier. So on my strimmer, for example, the cable that came with it I've cut off here and fitted one of these inline connector plugs, and so when I want to use the strimmer I just plug that into the cable, or the same with the mower and the same with the electric scarifier. Well, there you are then, that's how to make reels for winding your garden electric cable or hose pipe. I hope you got some useful tips out of that video, and if you'd like to subscribe to my channel to get automatic notification of future videos, you can click on the circular icon appearing on the screen on the left now, or you can get a flavour of my other videos on this channel by clicking either of the two icons appearing on the right of the screen. Thank you very much for watching.